This brief overview will aim to give those who are new to lesson study an introduction to a recap about the purpose of lesson study, the importance of open and trusting relationships as part of lesson study, what to keep in mind when observing the research lesson, including the school-wide research theme, goals of the lesson, and points of evaluation, what to focus on during the research lesson, and guidance about observations that might be the most and least useful to support the planning team to address the issue under investigation. The purpose of lesson study is to gain new knowledge for teaching and learning, with the aim of ultimately improving outcomes for pupils. With this in mind, it's important to consider how our observations in the research lesson can support this purpose. Remember that the school-wide research theme represents a gap between where your pupils currently are and where you would ideally like them to be. It is a long-term goal addressed over 2 to 3 years. The research topic is an area that is posing a teaching and learning issue that the planning team wants to address. Lesson study should provide a safe space to take risks, explore ideas, and evaluate the impact of these. If teachers feel they can be open about what they do or do not understand in relation to a particular topic, and feel comfortable sharing areas that they are experiencing difficulties with in relation to teaching and learning, this will hopefully provide a productive setting in which these issues can be explored and addressed. It is okay to have differences in opinion. Sharing and debating these openly and considering alternative perspectives may help all those participating consider ideas in a way that they haven't thought of before. Remember that lesson study is not about creating a perfect plan or teaching a perfect lesson. You're researching an area that is posing a problem. It is therefore normal for things to not go as planned or unanticipated or undesired outcomes to arise. What is important is that as a group, you use detailed observations from the lesson to identify these issues and try to evaluate what the impact of these choices was on pupil learning and why they had the impact they did. Using this information, you can then consider alternative approaches to address the issue at hand. Your detailed observations may also highlight that choices you made as a result of studying curriculum materials and research appears to have had a positive impact on pupil learning. Can you use these observations to identify what it was about the choices you made that appeared to positively influence pupil learning? When observing the research lesson, you should keep in mind the school-wide research theme. This statement generally includes a desired outcome for pupils and an entry point for achieving that outcome. An example of a research theme from a school in Highland is enabling pupils to become effective contributors who can share their thought processes with others and use their own and others' ideas to solve problems and apply their thinking. This will be developed through the use of discussion stems, pupil reflections, concrete materials, and visual representations. The research proposal will identify the goals of the lesson. Keep these in mind when gathering data about the lesson. Here's an example of lesson goals from a research lesson in a school in Highland. Understand that while addition is commutative, the order of the addends can be changed and the result will remain the same. Subtraction is not. If you change the order of the numbers, this will change the result of the problem. Begin to understand and use the language, minuend, subtrahend, and difference to make our explanations clearer and less wordy. The planning team will have identified points of evaluation that relate to both the school-wide research theme and the goals of the lesson. When you observe the lesson, keep these points in mind and gather data to support the planning team to address these. Here's an example of the points of evaluation from a research lesson in a school in Highland. Pause the video and read the examples in your own time and then resume the video. Focusing on the whole class and gaining an overview of the lesson from this perspective might be useful to get a general sense of the lesson as a whole. However, it can be challenging to focus on the whole class all at once, and it might mean that you miss key learning or misunderstandings from some pupils. Focusing on specific pupils can mean that you get a skewed perspective of the lesson. However, it also has its benefits. By focusing on just one or two pupils, you can get detailed insights into the evolution of their thinking as the lesson progresses, including any peaks or troughs in relation to their sense-making. If each observer focuses on a different pupil, you can gain useful insights into a broad spectrum of individuals. Look in the research proposal to see if the team has asked observers to gather information on specific pupils. If nothing is specified, you might choose the approach that you feel will be most useful. A group of observers may choose to identify some members who view the whole class, and others who focus on specific pupils to gain both perspectives. Observations that might be most useful include being as specific as possible, recording exactly what pupils said and did, recording how many pupils responded in a particular way, identifying instances that appear to have a range of impacts on pupil learning, including positive, negative, or no impact. Observations that might be least useful include making vague or generic statements that are not supported by evidence from the lesson. For example, "That was a great lesson," or "The pupils really enjoyed it, they learnt a lot." Attributing an observation to more pupils than there is evidence for. For example, you might have observed a small number of pupils, such as 4, make statements that highlighted key learning from the lesson, but then you may have overgeneralized this and state that the lesson goals were achieved by all pupils because of what a few more prominent individuals have said. Observations that only focus on the positive impacts and do not address areas that did not appear to work or appeared to have a negative impact. Remember that the lesson is not intended to be a perfect lesson. It's okay if aspects you planned do not work. The important part is that as a team, you learn from this. The following observations come from a research lesson taught in a school in Highland. Observations were noted down during the lesson and subsequently organised based on the points of evaluation that they provided evidence for. The examples coming up come from the points of evaluation shared earlier. 3. Do pupils grasp the key point of the lesson, that in subtraction you can't switch the digits in the minuend and subtrahend? This will result in a different solution. And 4. Is there a change in the pupil's understanding and/or use of strategies as the lesson progresses? Pause the video and read these observations in your own time. When you've finished reading, play the video again to move on to the next set of observations. Pause the video again to read these observations before continuing. This gives an overview of some comments or questions that were posed as a result of the observations just shared, in order to support the planning team to consider ways that they might continue to address the issues they've identified. Again, pause the video to read this in your own time before continuing. The exact nature of the school-wide research theme, lesson goals, and points of evaluation might vary from one planning team to another. However, the purpose of lesson study remains the same. We're trying to address a teaching and learning issue. As an observer, record observations that outline what pupils said and did, and use this to provide evidence to address the points of evaluation. By developing a culture of open and trusting relationships, members of the planning team and other observers can engage in productive discussions that acknowledge when choices made by the planning team did appear to have the desired impact, but also when they didn't. Observations can then be used to try to work out why these outcomes happened and what the team might do differently to continue to address the issues they've identified.